In the last episode, I explored and investigated a mysterious tunnel near the town of Yalgoo, approximately 500 kilometers north of Perth. I like tunnels. Tunnels are cool. Joker's Tunnel might be inaccessible for some, however, so let's look at something a bit closer to home. At the end of High Street in Fremantle, you will find the Whalers Tunnel. This is old, much older than I originally thought. Dating back to the very start of European colonisation, this was the very first engineered tunnel in Western Australia. It might even be the first tunnel, pending any discovered records saying otherwise. You needed a very good reason to dig a tunnel in the 1830s. You can't visit Fremantle without at least noticing Arthur's Head. The large limestone outcrop is very prominent in the town site, especially if you're walking down High Street. Situated on the mouth of the Swan River, it was an entry point for colonisers and a meeting place for Aboriginals. However, this would all change in 1837 when the whaling industry arrived in Bathers Bay. There were various operations over the years, but the Fremantle Whaling Company was the most prominent. Whale oil was a very early commodity for the colony, with 15 whaling stations eventually being built along the Western Australian coast. But since the entire bay was used for whaling and the town site was to the east, Arthur's Head was in the way. As such, it was proposed that a tunnel be excavated through the outcrop, connecting the bay to High Street. Their intentions were made public in the 11th of May 1837 edition of the Swan Guardian. They proposed using prison labour. They also highlighted how soft the rock was, indicating that it would be a straightforward project. It was then reported on the 10th of June in the Perth Gazette that the likes of John Septimus Roe and Henry Reveley visited the site. Reveley was the civil engineer for early public works in the colony. We've mentioned him before. Considering the company was bankrolling a project that would be useful for everyone in the colony, and that all they asked for in return was prison labour and engineering expertise, it was likely an easy yes from the government. Indeed, prison labour was used from the roundhouse upstairs. It's a common misconception that transported convicts were used in the construction, but they wouldn't arrive in WA until 1850, nearly 15 years later. It is believed, however, that the prisoners were aided by miners and soldiers residing in the town site. As promised, the tunnel construction was quick and was achieved using mostly pickaxes. It began in August of 1837, with completion only 5 months later in the following January. Once complete, the tunnel was approximately 65 metres long, and the walls and ceilings were lined with bricks. The original steps up to the roundhouse were constructed in 1836, but were later altered to suit the tunnel. This would extend the tunnel by another 3 metres. Once complete, the company was awarded a 5-year lease since the tunnel was on Crown land. They were even allowed to levy tolls on goods travelling through the tunnel. Considering it was cheap to excavate and they used mostly free labour, it seems as if they got a pretty good deal from the government. As time went on, Arthur's Head was extensively quarried. So much was removed that the tunnel was reduced in size to its current length of 46 metres. This is a shame, but also shows why the tunnel was necessary in the first place. Before I began research, I always wondered why they bothered to build the tunnel at all. It would be trivial to move goods around the headland at its current, much smaller size. Luckily for the whales, the industry declined in the middle of the 1800s. Kerosene came onto the market, which was hotter, cleaner, and emitted no smell or smoke. A whaling station so close to town was also unpopular with the locals. You can probably imagine why, especially during the warmer months. Whaling companies began to go out of business, with the Fremantle Whaling Company ceasing operations in 1850. Other operations survived until the early 1860s, the economy moved on, and a boat building industry grew in place of the whalers. Originally, they existed for the whalers, but they capitalised on the growing port in the following decades. They continued in this location until as recently as the 1970s. The tunnel continued to be used as a thoroughfare, much like it is today. As an interesting side note, power cabling for the tramways and the electric lighting board were run through the tunnel in 1905. They led to a powerhouse that was situated on the South Mole. Additionally, sewer and water services were laid for the tunnel in 1916. You might also spot this spur tunnel. Several of my sources state this was excavated in 1906 when Fort Arthur Head was established. This was likely intended to be an escape tunnel for emergencies. However, an information sign inside of the tunnel instead claims it was dug in 1938. It states it was used as easy access from the gunner's cottage, with the tunnel being used as an air raid shelter during World War II. While that is also probably true, I'm unsure what date the spur tunnel was actually dug. Regardless, it seems as if the authorities weren't properly maintaining the tunnel during this period. During the May of 1928, about 5 tons of rock fell. This prompted the tunnel to be closed to the public, with both entrances sealed off with sheet metal. Fortunately, there were some restoration efforts in 1937. This included new gates for both entrances, which are still there to this day, although it seems as if the tunnel was still closed to the public at this time. Fast forwarding to the groovy 60s, the original steps were truncated and replaced to facilitate the train line. That's actually not very groovy. However, some of the original steps were uncovered during a conservation project in 1994. You can see them halfway up if you've ever wondered why there's a set of steps to nowhere. Also quite ungroovy was the continued excavation of Arthur's Head throughout the same decade. As you can see from aerial photography, quite a large section with gun emplacements on top was removed. That whole section was brought down to port level, with the J shed being relocated to its current position. If you walk around that area now and look down, you can still see the remains of the original cliff face, along with excavated ruins. This brings us to the next chapter of Arthur's Head's history. In the 70s, the Kalgoorlie School of Mines reinforced the tunnel walls by spraying concrete. This would have saved it from further degradation, but no doubt lost its 1830s charm. In 2000, however, a large section of concrete was removed from the western side, so we now have an idea of its original appearance. That portion of the tunnel is now stabilised with an anchored steel support frame. The Western Australian Museum also carried out test excavations of the surrounding area in 1984. This was before a planned redevelopment coincided with the bicentennial in 1988. They found the remains of large structures, which were likely boathouses, warehouses, and workshops from the whaling period. They didn't find any remains of a major jetty, however. It's believed even the piles were removed as far back as 1871, so they wouldn't be a hazard to marine traffic. Dives after severe winter storms have also discovered whale bones and a whaler's killing lance, so there is still quite a lot of history to be found underground. Back to the tunnel, archaeological investigations in 1988 discovered the original floor and the service trenches. There is a window on the ground supposedly showing these, but this was unlit and full of sand. It was at this point that the tunnel was finally reopened to the public. As promised, the area was significantly landscaped in the late 80s. The area around the J shed, at this point, was a port storage yard and a car park. The city of Fremantle also reinstated the 1829 shoreline. That's probably when those excavated ruins were put on permanent display. Unfortunately, I think this sign once said what those ruins actually are, but if we go off this map, it looks like it could have been the station house, the Muse boat shed, and the Tri-Works. I've also read several sources that state part of a breakwater from 1837, which was built by the Fremantle Whaling Company, was uncovered and is now found on the northern end of the beach. I couldn't find a sign for that either. My guess is that it could be these old limestone blocks, or maybe these hunks of concrete and metal that jut out of the ocean. I discovered it wasn't the latter after some research. Instead, these were the original gun mounts that were on top of the excavated portion from the 1960s. So nice of the workers to dump them into the ocean. All the quarrying of Arthur's Head from the inception of the colony to the 1960s has taken its toll over the years. This left the existing cliff faces exposed to the elements and contributed to instability issues. This all came to a head, excuse the pun, in 2018 when the tunnel was closed, fearing rockfall. The cliffs were fenced off, with temporary scaffolding installed around the tunnel's western entrance. In 2020, the state government and the city of Fremantle pledged a combined $1 million for cliff remediation. The cliff face was repaired, and retaining walls were extended along the train line. The tunnel also received a new rockfall canopy that doubled as a public art piece in March of 2022. The laser-cut artwork was by Joe Derbyshire and depicts both European and Noongar history. The European side features whaling ships, alongside a visual interpretation of an Aboriginal story about whales, which they refer to as the Mamong. This story was told by Noongar elder Noel Nannup, who gave permission for the story to be used. In the present day, the Arthur Head precinct is visited by 400,000 people a year. It's well worth exploring if you're like me and have only ever walked past or through it. Notably, up top is the Roundhouse, which is the oldest building in the Perth Metro. One day, this will get its own video. Just behind that is a time ball. I've just learned what a time ball is actually. Recently, I was on holiday in Melbourne. I've been there many times and have seen all the obvious sights, so I thought I would dig a bit deeper and discover some locations in keeping with the themes of this channel. As such, I've created a Melbourne travel guide for my members. For example, why has this Ford Fairlane been sitting in this car bay for over 10 years? Well, you'll just have to watch the video and find out. I've also released travel vlogs for separate filming trips to the Kalgoorlie and Kew regions. I haven't quite made my way through the backlog yet, but many of my recent videos were filmed on these trips. Lastly, I have a 2-part series showing the entire process of how I make a video. In this case, what happened to the Clays Brook. The support program is just $3 a month and can be cancelled at any time. That $3 includes the extra content, shows your username at the end of the videos, and highlights any comments you might make. All money earned goes back into the production of future videos. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.